Hey guys, it's Peter, and welcome to my channel, Peter Watches TV, where I watch all the TV shows, and then I come over here and I react to them. And I react to a lot of true crime documentaries over here, always the newest ones. So if you like true crime documentaries, and you like to talk about true crime documentaries, come over here and hang out with me. Okay, today I want to talk about the newest true crime documentary that just dropped today on Netflix, which is called Amy Bradley is Missing. I watched this last night as soon as it came out at 3 o'clock in the morning, my time. I started watching it, and I watched every episode last night and finished it at about 6:15 in the morning, I think. Something like that, and just binge watched it last night. And so I wanted to come on here and I wanted to talk about it today. I actually watched 2 true crime documentaries last night. Before that, I watched one of the train wreck documentaries on Netflix, which I'll probably cover tomorrow. The Project X documentary that they did on train wreck. But today I want to talk about the Amy Bradley documentary that just dropped on Netflix, because if I don't talk about a true crime documentary right after I watch it, or within the couple days after I watch it, I start forgetting things that were my reactions, like when I'm sitting there watching it. And if you watch a lot of my TV reactions, you know that I take a lot of notes when I'm watching TV shows. But with true crime documentaries, I typically do not take notes. I just watch it and I kind of react to it. I have a long history of watching true crime documentaries way back into my youth, and am a lover of true crime cases and cold cases, and am always very interested and intrigued about it. And one of the things that whenever I watch a true crime documentary or read a true crime novel or book is how the treatment of the victim and the treatment of the victim's families, I think, is always very important. Are they honored? Are they respected? And things like that. So I went into this documentary last night. I really didn't, to be honest with you, know a whole lot about this case. My friend, we were talking on the phone last night, and she said that she wanted to watch this documentary. And I said, what's the documentary called? And she said, it's called Have You Seen Amy? And I said, I've never heard of this documentary before. And so I started searching it up. And what's interesting is that I had it on my Netflix to like remind me that it was coming out. But I started looking up Have You Seen Amy Netflix, and nothing came up. But it came up like Amy documentaries on Netflix, and it was like Amy Winehouse documentary. It was not this one. And so I texted her and was like, that's not what it's called. It's not pulling up anywhere. And so she sent me, I guess, on the poster, it says, Have You Seen Amy on here? So anyway, I found out that it was about Amy Bradley. And in all honesty, I did not know much about this case until I watched the documentary last night. When I went into it, I thought, I don't know anything about this case. I don't remember anything about this case. I don't remember any coverage. And this is a case that has had, tons, just a plethora of media coverage through the years. And so I was kind of surprised when it started, and I was like, I don't remember anything about this. And then when they started showing footage of the parents being interviewed later, and the brother, when they showed pictures or videos of the brother and the sister when they were younger, I was like, oh, I do remember this. I do remember this. So Amy Bradley was around my age. I think she was born in 74. Actually, before we get into this, I want to read you just straight from the Wikipedia so that you guys know the background story. I also want to say this. This is just my reaction to the documentary. This is not me doing a deep dive into the case. There are lots of true crime videos that have been done about this case, about the Amy Bradley case, on YouTube and on TikTok. The documentary actually shows quite a few of those. Kendall Ray is highlighted quite a bit in the documentary. And so you can find that out there. There's tons of news articles that have been written. There's websites that are dedicated to the Amy Bradley case. So this is just a reaction to the documentary. If you guys want to leave your theories in the comment section below or have a conversation about it, I feel free to do that. But in doing that, let's be respectful of Amy Bradley and her family. Okay, so let me just give you kind of a background story from the Wikipedia. Amy Lynn Bradley was born May 12th, 1974, so she is almost exactly 2 years younger than me, because my birthday is June 29th of 72. Amy Lynn Bradley is an American woman who went missing during a Caribbean cruise on the Royal Caribbean International cruise ship, Rhapsody of the Seas, in late March 1998 while en route to Curacao. Her whereabouts remain unknown to this day. She was a 23-year-old Longwood University graduate at the time of her disappearance. After midnight on March 23rd, 1998, Amy and her younger brother Brad headed to the ship's nightclub to go dancing. The ship's door lock records showed that Brad had entered his cabin at around 3:35 a.m., and Amy soon followed 5 minutes later. Amy's father, Ron, awoke around 6 a.m. to check on his daughter, only to find her missing from the balcony she had slept on earlier. When authorities were alerted that Amy was missing, the Netherlands Antilles Coast Guard conducted a 4-day search in the surrounding waters and along the cruise lines to no result. Authorities began to speculate that she may have fallen overboard and drowned. And there's also a lot of speculation that she may have taken her own life. There have been possible sightings of Amy in Curacao. In August 1998, tourists saw a woman resembling Amy on a beach, and in 1999, a member of the U.S. Navy claimed a woman in a brothel said she was Amy and asked him for help. In the years following her disappearance, some new evidence would arise, leading to theories including Amy being sold into human trafficking industry or potential remains. The case has been presented on Dr. Phil and America's Most Wanted. In July 2025, the 3-part documentary series, Amy Bradley is Missing, was released on Netflix. So, obviously, I mean, it's a 3-part documentary. I think each episode is about 45 to 50 minutes. About 50 minutes. I'm not going to remember everything from the documentary. It's done in 3 parts, and let me kind of explain the parts to you. So the first part is kind of explain the background history of Amy and her parents going on this cruise. The second part is Amy missing, although they get into that at the beginning part of the documentary. Amy missing and them looking for Amy. And the third part is kind of like the things that have happened. I think the second episode is called I Saw Her or something, because the second episode is really focused mostly around all the sightings of Amy Bradley. And there were sightings of her in, I believe, Barbados and in Curacao. And so that was the second part. And then in the third part is kind of like where the family is at today a little bit, and still follow-up sightings of her. And also this steel drum band player that she was seen with dancing in the club, his daughter reaches out to the Bradleys with supposed information, which in all honesty to me didn't seem like a lot of information. So that's kind of how the documentary is formed. A heavy part of the documentary is focused on Amy Bradley's sexuality and her having just come out recently before having gone on this cruise with her parents. They talk about her parents' kind of reaction to her coming out, and that they were not necessarily happy with her coming out as a lesbian. And that they also have like 2 former girlfriends of hers that are interviewed. So it's a really conclusive documentary. I thought it was really, really well done. I thought that it felt to me, in all honesty, it felt like a longer kind of Unsolved Mysteries. It very much had that element to it where it was very scary. It was, I thought, very well done. I thought it was respectful of Amy Bradley and her parents. Her parents are heavily interviewed in the documentary, as is her brother, Brad Bradley. He is like heavily interviewed as well all these years later. And it's not just about them being interviewed about the case. It's about them being interviewed in how they are today in reaction to what they've gone through for the last, almost 30 years. That kind of like Brad says something at one point towards the end, and he says, I think he says something like, I'm going to be 48 and I have never had kids. And part of that is because I've seen what my parents went through. And there's a part at the end where they show like her bags, her suitcases from the cruise, and her mom just like breaks down in the attic, and they're like, when's the last time that you opened that? And she's like, I don't know, like 20 years. And they've like bottles of shampoo and like mouthwash and stuff like that from the cruise. So it's still obviously just heart-wrenching for them today. One of the things that I thought was just really, really amazing about this family is that they live with so much hope. And like one of the friends of Amy says that her father had just visited her. This is at the end of the documentary, that her father had just visited her the week before, and he said something about when Amy comes home. And so they do talk about that. They do talk about at the end a little bit about, would they rather just have closure and find out that, she's passed away, she's no longer here, or would they, do they still hold out hope? And they talk a lot about the power of hope, which I think is really, really important. So it's not just a true crime documentary. It's really a documentary about this trauma that this family has gone through and how they've survived on the other side. A lot of her friends are, like her college friends, her high school friends and stuff like that, are highly interviewed, as well as members of the crew of the cruise ship. That part was kind of interesting to me. They didn't seem very, I mean, not that they did anything wrong, but there didn't seem to be a lot of remorse. There didn't seem to be even a lot of compassion, if you want to know the truth, from the cruise members. I will say this, it didn't make me want to jump on a cruise anytime soon. I mean, I feel like I just watched the Poop Cruise documentary, and now I'm watching this. I mean, there's other missing cases. There's actually a woman on here whose daughter went missing on a 3-day cruise, and she's now become like an advocate for passenger rights, I believe, and like changing how things are done. And she explains that when you're on a cruise, which I feel like I had this conversation with somebody years ago. I've never been on a cruise. I have no desire to go on a cruise, but this is not the reason why. I just don't think I'm a cruise person. But she said, you know, you think you're in like the United States because it looks like the United States and there's restaurants and things like that, but you're literally in international waters. So anything that could happen out there is not governed by any kind of like US law and things like that, which I think is an interesting perspective when you talk about like a missing person. Because a lot of the ties, the FBI is interviewed. I mean, the 2 agents in the FBI that get involved, I mean, they're heavily interviewed. There's 3 agents, actually, that are involved. One steps in later. Law enforcement in Curacao is interviewed. The documentary relies heavily on testimony and interviews from the people. So when it starts, it kind of talks about the background history of Amy and her being like an athlete and going to college, and she had just graduated from college and she just got a new job and she got her first apartment. I will say this, what I thought was interesting is that they don't really bring the sexuality issue into it. And like, I just want to say this, I'll make this very clear. I have not watched multiple YouTube videos. I haven't done a lot of research. I'm just going off this documentary. Okay, so I don't know a lot about the history of this. But I did think that it was interesting that the producers of the documentary chose to introduce her sexuality at the point where they started talking about the possibility that she could have taken her own life. For me, as a gay man, it was just an interesting point of view that they took. For me, because there was things that like stood out to me. Like at the beginning when they talk about it, they do talk about the fact that like, did she jump from the balcony? So they go on this cruise, okay? I think her mom and dad are insurance agents, and they won this cruise. And so then they find out that they can bring Amy and Brad with them. And so Amy and Brad go with them. They're all staying in the same room. So they're on this cruise, and I think the cruise is a 7-day cruise. I think it's out of San Juan, and then they go to Aruba, and then from Aruba, they're going to Curacao. So on the night between Aruba and Curacao, I might be wrong about this. It might have been a night out, like, that they were at sea, but I think it's between Aruba and Curacao. They're coming into Curacao. They had gone to this formal dinner, like a captain's dinner on a cruise, where they get dressed up. They had come back and changed. Everybody went to go, the whole family went up to the top deck, and they did this, like, limbo dancing contest, and Brad won the contest. And then the parents went to bed, and Brad and Amy went to, like, the disco and I'm laughing because of the name, the disco, but they went to, like, the nightclub, and they went dancing, and then came into the room about 3:30. Well, when Amy came in right after him, they went out on the patio and were, like, out there smoking cigarettes. They had been drinking most of the night. The dad at one point said something about, because they talk about how small she is. They talked about how much, like when they looked on the drink ticket tab, that she had 7 light, I think it was 7 light beers. And at that point, from like 6 p.m. on, so 6 p.m. on to like 3 a.m. In all honesty, I mean, if you're talking about the possibility of like a beer getting out of your system within an hour, it really isn't a lot, in all honesty, over that period of time. And I've been sober for over 30 years. I'm very active in a 12-step program. I do know how alcohol works in your system. So no, it is not a lot over that long period of time. But that's not to say that other people weren't giving her drinks. I mean, she's in a nightclub. There's video footage later of her dancing with the steel metal drum band. I mean, people could have been buying her drinks. People could have been buying her shots. None of that would have shown up on the ticket. So who knows how much Amy Bradley had to drink that night. So her and her brother out there talking. Her brother goes inside to go to bed. She stays out on the patio in this like lounge chair. And her dad wakes up, I think at like 5:28 in the morning. and he sees her laying on the lounge chair. And then, to be honest with you, I'm kind of surprised that, although there was no animosity, their family was extremely tight, and I do not believe this at all. I'm just saying, is there any speculation? Because to me, watching true crime documentaries, not like just as a true crime observer, this was one thing, like, if you're a true crime watcher, you'll know what I'm talking about, where you're like, doop, your ears go up. When the father was the last person to see her, I was kind of surprised they didn't focus more attention on that he was the last one that saw her. He saw her at 5:28. He has no recollection of her coming in. He did remember the sun coming in. He has no recollection of her coming in, but he went back to sleep. And when he woke up at 6 o'clock, 30 minutes later, she's gone from the patio. And the door's cracked open, and her shoes are out there, and a yellow shirt is inside the room, and so supposedly she's left the room. I'm not saying that I believe that the father has anything to do with it. I do not. I 100% do not believe that. But I'm kind of surprised that there hasn't been more speculation, or there wasn't more speculation in the documentary about that, because he's literally the last person that saw her. Now, at one point, the FBI is interviewing them individually, and he does say to his wife, well, we're basically suspects, is what he says. So that's why they're interviewing us separately, which would make sense, right? But there was no issue between her and the parents. So then the parents go down. I also thought it was interesting. I don't know, like the timing for me was kind of like in watching this, all this stuff, and this is a 30-year-old case, so, but the father gets up at 6, and then he's like, well, Amy must have gone out to go get coffee. I'll go find her. And he goes out, and they talk about how it's a 10-story ship, and it's 1,000 feet long. You know, she's a 23-year-old woman. I mean, she's obviously, like, maybe meeting people and things like that. And the father goes out, and within a half an hour, he comes back to the room. He's like, I can't find Amy. In a 1,000-long ship, and you couldn't find Amy in half an hour. Well, that's not surprising to me. That was interesting to me that so quickly he was like, I can't find Amy. And then they went into panic mode. And I think it was because they were coming into Curacao. At some point, someone said something about, she had told somebody she was a good swimmer, and so they thought maybe she jumped, she was going to beat the ship in. I mean, that would indicate such a high level of intoxication that she would say something. I mean, I don't know. And you're also jumping down, like, cruise ships are huge. You know what I mean? Like, they showed it from where their cabin was. I mean, it was like, I don't know that anybody would just jump into that water just thinking that they're going to swim to shore. I don't know. Like, that to me just seemed so off. Later, when they had cleaned the room, and so there was no way, that was interesting to me. I will say this, there was not more focus on that they didn't cordon off the room, okay? So there was a lot that was messed up about this with the ship and the people that were working on the ship. So they went down and they said, could you page her overhead? And they wouldn't page her overhead because they said they didn't want to disrupt the other people that were sleeping. So they wouldn't page her overhead. But then about an hour later, everybody was getting off the ship to go to Curacao, which, if people were up getting coffee, people would have been up already. I don't understand why they wouldn't page her overhead. Like, that to me is that is bizarre. And also the attitudes of the crew members was bizarre to me. Later they speculate that maybe the crew was involved and all this kind of stuff, and that she was maybe like marked to be taken by the crew or something like that. I'm not entirely, as a true crime buff, I'm not going to say that I would rule that out. They didn't, the couple crew members that they were like, kind of like, the show has to go on. And I understand that as a business, right? But then they end up searching all the rooms. It's like, okay, so they won't do anything. And then everybody gets off the ship. And then after everybody's off the ship, then they're willing to do everything. That was what was interesting to me. Then they're searching. They do something, I don't know, it's called some kind of search where they literally search every inch of the ship. And the captain comes to them and says she's not on the ship. Well, at that point, everybody was already off the ship on the excursion anyway. So why they wouldn't have done it before they opened the doors, that's where I feel like they really messed up. Now, it did say at the end of it that, I think it was in 1999, the Bradley family sued, what was the cruise company? I think it was it Carnival Cruise? Hold on a second. That they sued, why can't I see this? Hold on a second. Royal Caribbean, and that they ended up dropping the case or dismissing the case or something like that, but they ended up suing them. So there was obviously no negligence on the part of Royal Caribbean, but I just thought that it was interesting to me. I don't know, like, after the fact they were willing to do all this kind of stuff. So then there's this huge investigation that goes on, and then the parents, they go with them through this, and then Anyway, so finally they fly back, I think from St. Thomas or something like that, and they like resume the investigation here in the United States. And that's where then you start, through the years, you start hearing all these sightings, okay? Well, this is like episode 2 is where they end episode 1 on a kind of cliffhanger of like somebody that was like, oh, I saw her. There's also the speculation of the guy that was in the room next to them. He's real sketch. He's like, I always take all these cruises by myself, and he was like leaning over the railing talking to Amy, and then he had his TV turned up real loud, and people like the room next to him could hear his TV turned up real loud, but he was talking to somebody. I think he was probably talking to somebody in that room, but I don't know that I think it was Amy. I mean, to like go up on a cruise ship and then go over into the room, I don't know, like, and then they're like, they said, well, could she have fallen or something? They did an entire investigation of like the ocean, the Coast Guard, everything. And they're like I think it was like the sheriff or whatever, I don't know. The police department in Curacao was like, something would have washed up. We have sharks, but something, an arm, a leg would have washed up. Nothing washed up. There's been no evidence that has ever been found in the water of Amy Bradley. So then there was this guy next door. The mom, interestingly enough, out of all of the theories, that's the one when they interviewed her. She was kind of like, yeah, he was always a weirdo. Like, I thought he was really weird. But then they cleaned the room. And when they cleaned the room, like, that's when the FBI agents came in after that. And the table had been pushed, the outside table had been pushed up to the railing, kind of indicating that maybe she pushed it up, stood on the table, and walked over the side. But they couldn't really tell because they had cleaned the room. This is another part where, for me, like, just sitting back and watching it, I'm sure there's a million conspiracy theories out there about this, but I was like, why would the ship, knowing the police were going to come on at some point, the FBI, not cordon off the room and say, we're not going to clean the room? Like, they should have pulled everybody from you would think that there would have been, and this is what this one woman is working on, there would have been, like, protocol in place to how to deal with a situation like this, but there was no protocol in place. So the family and everybody else is just milling around this room, and then the housekeeping staff comes in and they clean up the room, and so there's like, they can't even get any evidence, they can't even get any fingerprints. I mean, it just was, so that to me, though, looked like, well, was the crew part of it? So then years later, I think it was 3 months later, this guy was like scuba diving with a friend of his in Curacao, and he was on the beach, and he ran into a girl and 2 men, and he said that he thought it was Amy Bradley when he saw her on the flyers later, the posters. He was almost like, he said not 99% sure, 100% sure. She had the tattoo that she had, which was like this Tasmanian devil. He was like, it was Amy Bradley, and the guy with her was this guy that they called Yellow, because at one point his hair was yellow. It's his daughter at the end that contacts the Bradleys. But they don't really, like, they try to look into it and follow it up. The other sighting is this guy in the Navy that later, like, went to a brothel and ran into Amy. And Amy said, like, I'm Amy Bradley. Like, I'm missing. And he didn't report it because he was going to, like, retire from the Navy soon, and he was afraid he would lose whatever because because they would know that he was at, like, a brothel and things like, I don't know, like, that story to me, I was kind of, like, he was like, what was I supposed to do? I was like, I think you were supposed to go to the police and tell them that this missing woman was at this brothel in Curacao. And I think that the people in the Navy would kind of understand that you were doing a good thing and overlook the brothel. That part to me was kind of like, that man was like, what was I supposed to do? You were supposed to do the right thing. And then later he said, this is why I'm coming out now and talking about it. I'm doing the right thing. Years later, when there's no way that they can find her. And then there was this woman that saw her in a bathroom, and I believe this was in Barbados, and she was in the stall, and these men came in with this woman, and they said, you better, like, be ready, like, I'm warning you, you better be ready for this thing tonight or something. She overheard the whole conversation, and she went and she started talking to the woman, and she said, like, what's your name? And she said, my name is Amy. And she's like, where are you from? And she thought she said West Virginia instead of Virginia, which is where they were from. I think Chesterville, Virginia. And then she said, so later when she saw it on the Dr. Phil show, she's like, oh my God, that's the woman that I talked to. Because what happens is somebody anonymously sends these pictures to the Bradleys of, like, an escort site. And it's pictures of Amy. And they do all of this investigations of, like, could these pictures be real? And they do, like, compare the chins, compare the ears, compare everything. What they find out is this is probably a picture of Amy and that she is escorting in the Caribbean, which is almost verifiable evidence that the woman is still alive, okay? What's interesting to me about this is that at the end of the episode, or the end of the documentary, I don't know, this was just baffling to me. The FBI put out these age progression pictures, of which the age progression pictures looked nothing like Amy in these escorting pictures, okay? The escorting pictures looked a lot like Amy. I was like, I mean, the mom even said, it was like, it was weird. It was like looking at her daughter. Like, she was like, this is Amy, right? And so everybody's putting all these conspiracy theories together. But in the middle of the second episode is when they start talking about her sexuality and her coming out and her going with like her friend and to tell her parents. And I don't know why they focused so much attention on this. I really kind of thought a lot about it when I was watching it. Because they do have like two of her exes come out. The one ex is like while she was in college. And she talks about how like her dad wrote her this letter. Amy's dad wrote her this letter that was like, I don't know, disparaging or not very nice or something. And then the other girlfriend is like a friend that she knew from like middle school basketball. And then they like had like met up like right before. But they kind of carry it out and act like they had this breakup, which they did. But then at the end, she shares that they had like gotten right back together right before she went on the cruise, and they were going to meet up for Easter, and everything was great. The other thing, so they kind of play into this whole thing that maybe that was why. I don't love that, I'll be honest with you. And as somebody that came out, I mean, I came out in 1990, so I understand. Like, even like one of the friends says, like, and she says it like, let's not shame the parents. And I agree with that. Okay, I 100% agree with that. You know, she says it was different in the 90s. It was different when I came out, you know? When I came out to my mom said to me, I'm afraid for you. And I thought she meant about getting AIDS. And I said, you know, Mom, blah, 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 I'll be safe, blah, blah. She said, that's not what I'm talking about. My mom was very forward thinking. So is my dad. And my mom said, if that happens, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. She said, people are not kind to gay people in our society. And, you know, it was a different world. It's a completely different world today. Like, you know, and parents have their own coming out process. I talk a lot about this in some of my other videos. You know, parents and family members have their own coming out process. There's loving your child unconditionally, and then there's coming to terms with what you were not ready to be prepared with. And I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying it was a different time and place. We weren't as educated as we are now on things like that. So I didn't really understand when they played into it, especially when there were all these factors that they did not focus on, which would indicate why Amy would not have taken her life. If Amy took her life, if that was the case, okay, it had to have been like she got wasted drunk that night, was sitting on the patio, was like, what's the point? That's the only thing I can think of. Because to me, in all honesty, like, she bought all this film and all this camera, and she was taking these pictures, okay, to enter a photography contest. You know, then she also, that to me is a huge part. And I know several people in my life, and I know the signs, and I know what to look for and things like that. That's not, I mean, that is, you know, a part of somebody that is planning to be here. Like, they're not making other plans. The apartment, the beginning of a rescue dog, all those things do not indicate somebody that is in the state of mind or has been in the state of mind to have this plan, okay? Which means that if that were the case, it would have been a momentary plan that happened. It would have been a reactionary plan. It wouldn't have been a state of mental health, which is what they're indicating in the documentary. They're indicating that because she had just come out and she was struggling with that, and because she had gone through this breakup, that was her mental state, and therefore, if she did take her life, that's why she did it. And I just, for me, I didn't love that like kind of train of thought that they went down. This is going to stop in a second. Hold on. Okay, so then that kind of brings me to, well, what do I think happened to Amy Bradley as somebody that does watch a lot of true crime documentaries and whatever? Towards the end of the documentary, the woman that was interviewed, that had seen the Dr. Phil show, that she and her husband, I believe it was in Barbados, had seen her in the bathroom. When she overheard the conversation, and they say this till the very end of the documentary, she overheard the woman say to the men, on the way, can we stop and see the children? And they said yes, and that she got very excited about that, about seeing the children, okay? And to me, and so then they speculated that there's a possibility that, like, I mean, it's been almost 30 years, that Amy could have had kids, that, you know, if Amy was being kept by these men and she was a prostitute, all this kind of stuff, that she could have these children. And that if they were threatening her, and we've seen this in a lot of abduction cases, that they're there's been so many abduction cases where women have had, I cannot remember, is it J.C. Duggard, the woman that was kept in the back behind the house for like 18 years and had kids? I mean, that's one of the main reasons why a lot of abducted women never leave, is because they have had children after they were abducted. That made so much sense to me. What did not make sense to me was the story that she told somebody about, I got off the ship to get drugs because my brother and I were partying. I didn't buy that story at all. That was almost, to me, like it was signaling to the person, like, if you tell this story, my brother's going to know that's BS, that I was taken and I'm in danger. That was almost what that was to me, because I got sober in 1994, okay? That time, I cannot even imagine. I mean, even today, it's even scarier, right? But back then, I can remember, like, I traveled a lot in the Caribbean with my dad when I was growing up. Went to St. Martin, went to Aruba, went to a lot of places that they were on this cruise. And I can remember my dad saying, like, you need to be really, really careful. Like, do not bring marijuana into the country. Do not bring pills. Do not, like, try to go get them, things like that. And as a pretty hardcore addict, I was even terrified of doing that. I don't know that I would have just walked off some cruise ship just being like, hey, I'm going to score some drugs to party. And she was not that savvy, okay? She was just not that savvy. She was from a small town in Virginia. She'd been up all night long partying with her brother, drinking beer in a club, okay? She just wasn't that savvy. And so I do not buy that this woman walked off into Curacao to go get some drugs. I don't buy that story. But if that's true that she did say that, then the question is, well, then why did she say that? Because then her brother, because he says later, there's no truth to that, because Amy was all about, I think he says Marlboro Lights and Miller Lights, you know? And so then he would know that in that moment that she didn't willingly walk off. And I think that there has to also be this fear that if I ever have a chance to come forward or get out of this situation, I'm never going to be able to name the people that took me. I'm never going to be able to name the people that, because there was like a part in there where they say something at the beginning about this cab driver that saw her. And she said something, or somebody said she owed like $200. No. It was the Navy guy that she owed $200. If she could just pay the $200 back, then she could get out of like this prostitution thing that she was doing or whatever. There's like a lot of the stories to me, and you know, memory is subjective in retrospect. I don't know, like it just didn't add up to me. It was almost kind of like they talked about how smart Amy is, right? If you're really that smart in a situation like that, but you're also fearing for your life, you know? I think, like, you would know that there are certain things that you said that are 100%, like, if you said it to somebody, like, if somebody said to you, okay, like, everybody in my life knows that my favorite movie is To Kill a Mockingbird. If somebody said, like, if I was, like, abducted and somebody said, ask Peter what his favorite movie is, okay? And I said my favorite movie was Poltergeist. My husband, my family, everybody would know that was bullshit. And that would be a sign, like, something is bad. Like, this is not okay. But Amy might be in a position where she is so terrified, okay, that if she names these people, they will never let her go. She will lose her kids forever if she has kids. The mother at the end is like, I mean, I probably have grandchildren or I might have grandchildren that I'll never live to see or I won't ever see. So she's grasping at straws. So when you hear these things that she says, you have to take them as also as clues that she might be, this is my one direct line of conversation that I am having with my family, because if this ever gets back, okay, to Brad, that I walked off the ship for some drugs, he's going to be like, that's crap. We were sitting on the balcony smoking cigarettes talking about some dude that hit on you, and isn't that so funny? And then you just decided 5 minutes later to go and get some drugs? No, there's no way that that's possible. So he would know that that was BS and be like, well, she was taken. And so I think there's a lot of signaling that's going on, and I don't know that they necessarily were going to talk about this in this documentary, because there may be things that we're not aware of that have been investigated. I don't know. There was a part in the documentary where two young women that were in the nightclub that had seen Amy, had seen this guy, whatever, they were on the top deck. They saw Amy and this yellow guy go in this elevator to the nightclub, and then they saw him come down, and then they saw him walk away, and he had been like hitting on them, but he paid them no attention, okay? They put that between 5:30 and 6 o'clock in the morning, which if that were true, there was no like, their mom let them into the room, so there was no like time entry onto the door. But if that were true, what that would indicate is that Amy did leave the room, and she did meet up with this guy, and that sometime between 5:30 and 6 o'clock in the morning was when she met him, which was at the same time that they were coming into Curacao. which if that were the case, and he was working with anybody, they could have quickly gotten her off the boat. Later, at the very end of I think it's the second end of the third episode, going into the third episode, this steel metal drum band guy, his name is Yellow, I can't remember what his real name is, but his daughter, who was not even born at the time, she like calls her dad on the phone. She like suspects her dad. If her dad has anything to do with it, just from my perspective, from listening to conversation, he was part of it, but I don't know that he's the one in control of it. I don't know. Like, to me, it was like, I don't know what her motive is. She's like, there's just too many missing pieces. But then they're like what? And she's like, I don't know. I was like, well, I don't know either. What are your missing pieces? Just that your dad was implicated in this and you saw it on America's Most Wanted? I didn't get it. I didn't get why she was on there. The mom said there had to be a reason why she would reach out to us and take that risk. Except she doesn't really have a relationship with her dad. And when she puts him on the phone, she asks him all these questions about what happened that night. And in all honesty, as somebody that watches a lot of true crime, his story added up, and he did not seem nervous to me. She's like, you always get frustrated when I ask you about this. And I was kind of like watching it being like, is he getting frustrated because he's part of it? Or is he getting frustrated because you've asked him so many times and he has no part in it? And the only real evidence that she had was that when he came home from that trip, his mom found a suitcase, or her mom found a suitcase of him with all these pictures with Caucasian women. What was all the women that he had taken pictures with on, I don't know. It just didn't, that part, I didn't really understand why they focused so much on that. What I do think, though, is, okay, and like Unsolved Mysteries, is that now that this documentary is out, because the mom says at one point that one of the FBI agents said something like, always keep your phone on, always keep your light on, because at some point something may happen. I do think, as a result of this documentary, I do believe that more evidence is going to come out. I think more eyewitness accounts are going to come out, and I do think that Amy Bradley may be found. And I hope for her, and I hope for her family that that's the case. Anyway, I thought it was a fantastically done documentary. I thought it was very, very interesting. I thought it was respectful of Amy and the family, and I thought it was really, really well done. So, anyway, let me know what you thought about it in the comment section below. I love you guys, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.